Hello, I'm Haigh, and I wanted to spend a few minutes talking to you about some of the recent findings from our latest report on the Nordic consulting market. And specifically, I wanted to ask the question, what are the threats and opportunities for strategy firms, particularly in the Nordics at the moment? Let's come on to that in a minute. I'd like to deal with the market in sort of broader context at first. The Nordic consulting market's in pretty good shape, actually. It's a market now worth 2.4 billion euros, so it's a pretty sizable market. And it grew just short of 5%, so about 4.7% in 2014, which again is pretty decent level of growth, certainly by recent Western consulting market standards. So good growth. It varied quite considerably from one place to the next, so the biggest market, Sweden, grew particularly well at over 5%. Denmark, the next biggest, grew a little bit slower than that at about 5% exactly. Norway, again a little bit smaller and grew a little bit more slowly, perhaps 4.5%, that kind of area. And then Finland, a much smaller market and a much slower growing market. So quite a lot of difference from one country to the next, and slightly different things playing out in each of these countries. But overall, growth of 4.7% is pretty decent. So superficially, at least, I think the market's in good shape, but it's our sense that there are some sort of threats lurking underneath the surface in terms of Nordic consulting at the moment. Firstly, I think this kind of much vaunted Nordic model that we and many others have been trumping over recent years. I think there's a lot of growing kind of commentary around the idea that might be something that's coming under threat. There was a very interesting piece by BCG not so long ago on precisely this subject, starting to kind of shatter some of the illusions about things like competitiveness in Nordic economies, and just suggesting that the Nordic model might not be all that it's cracked up to be. So some kind of broad sort of socio-economic, political sort of threats lurking beneath the surface. I think there's threats too in the shape of Russia, and I don't want to overplay that, certainly in places like Denmark and Norway. But the further east you move within the Nordics, the more this becomes a bit of a factor, and certainly by the time you get to speaking to people in Finland, people are really quite concerned about what's happening in Russia and the impact it has on their region. So Russia a big threat potentially, as is Europe, frankly. There's still a lot of instability in the Eurozone. I know a lot of people are still very concerned about the threat of a Grexit, and that's just creating uncertainty. And we have to understand this broader context that sits around the Nordic market these days, because it impacts on what's going on within the Nordics. So for strategy firms specifically, again, in pretty good shape actually. They're about the third largest segment of the Nordic consulting market, behind technology firms and Big Four firms. So perhaps not asserting themselves to the degree they are in some cases elsewhere. A market worth, for strategy firms specifically, worth slightly in excess of 500 million euros. And growth there of a little less than 4.5%, so not far off being in line with the market average. The good news actually for a start for strategy firms is that they are outgrowing the market for strategy consulting, which suggests to us that there's a degree of diversification going on in strategy firms. They're winning business outside of their traditional area, and I think that's a pretty hopeful kind of situation for them. In terms of opportunities, clearly, a lot of the big questions that clients are asking themselves at the moment are strategic in nature. Clients are trying to fundamentally reappraise the business that they're in, or how they go about the business that they do. They're looking at their competitive landscape and trying to work out how to respond to quite sweeping changes within that. And these are very strategic things. These are things that are being driven from the most senior offices within a company. The sort of projects that are very much suited to strategy firms. Off the back of that, we hear an awful lot about transformation. So those kind of big questions that clients are asking are leading to broad transformative programs. And again, I think there's a lot of opportunity for that, for strategy firms in that. And lastly, digitization, which is very often a part of that transformation agenda. How do firms become more, organizations become more digital, both in terms of how they do things, what they offer, but even to some extent who they are, what they're all about. And I think that's work again. That's a lot of which is very strategic in nature and inherently suits strategy firms. But of course there are threats. there are threats from a competitive perspective, both in the shape of the big four, who to many clients at the moment who are facing broad transformation programs look a bit like a one-stop shop. They're able to do everything, and that looks pretty attractive to many clients, even if there are questions about the extent to which they're really capable at both the technology end and the strategy end. They're certainly making a pretty convincing claim to that now, and that's got some resonance, I think, with clients who are looking for a big strategic partner or a big partner to come in and kind of hold their hand through a big transformation experience. So threat in the shape of the big four, threat two in the shape of the technology firms. And I think this is perhaps the area I'd really like to leave you with here, is the sense that technology firms now are really talking a strategy game. Someone in the Nordic said to me recently, there really is no difference now between technology and strategy. Technology is a strategy. And I think technology firms are really kind of seizing that and starting to talk quite a convincing strategic game. And the question for me, therefore, for strategy firms is, can they convince clients of their technology capabilities, because this works both ways, before, or as well as at least, technology firms convince clients of their strategy capabilities. Hope that was useful. Please contact us if you'd like any more information.